Marvel sure has a lot of bug-based superheroes. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 12th movie in the MCU, Marvel's 2015 superhero comedy, Ant-Man. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Ant-Man stars Paul Rudd, Michael Douglas, and Evangeline Lilly, and was directed by Peyton. It tells the story of thief Scott Lang, played by Paul Rudd, who must pull off a micro and macroscopic heist in order to prevent dangerous technology from falling into the wrong hands. I still remember the first time I heard that a superhero movie called Ant-Man was coming out. I honestly thought that it was a joke. I'm not a deep cut or even medium cut comic person, so prior to this film, I wasn't even aware that such a character existed. When I found out that Ant-Man was a real character, I still thought Marvel had gone off the deep end. Iron Man? Fine. Captain America? Sure. Thor? Alright. The Hulk? Why not? The Avengers? Makes sense. But Ant-Man? What? It had been 7 years since the release of the first MCU film, but were they really scraping the bottom of the barrel already? It's funny looking back on it now. At the time, Guardians of the Galaxy was the only MCU film that didn't center around super widely known characters. Before that, it was all superheroes that everyone knows, even if you've never read a comic. But now, a mere 8 years after the release of Ant-Man, it's truly impressive to see how expanded the MCU has become. Doctor Strange, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Shang-Chi, the Eternals, all comparatively deep-cut Marvel characters to get their own standalone films, most of which having already gotten a sequel too. And that's not even counting the TV shows. We're in an era of the MCU now where they could throw pretty much any character on the screen and people are gonna love the movie. But when Ant-Man first came out, throwing an obscure character at us in his own solo movie was still a bit of a gamble. And clearly, it paid off. Ever since Iron Man and the inception of this franchise, the MCU has always aimed to entertain. Some films have been more fun or joke-heavy than others, but even while prioritizing comic book storytelling or universe building, there was always a degree of lightheartedness to the films. Even so, I would argue that it wasn't until Guardians of the Galaxy that we got our first comedy-centric MCU movie. That film has adventure and heart and a lot of other things going on too, but it was very funny and very pop culture driven in a way that's different from the rest of the MCU. And Ant-Man is a film that follows more in those footsteps than any others. It still utilizes the MCU formula and has a very typical villain plot, but this film is extremely fun, and I think that was really the goal here. It's colorful, it's kind of silly, it's loaded with jokes and very intentional humor. It never tries too hard to be a profound, serious story, so it's one that's just easy to sit back and enjoy. The casting of Paul Rudd as our titular Ant-Man makes that even easier. Now, obviously, as somebody who didn't even know that this character existed prior to the film, I'm not someone who can provide some in-depth analysis of whether or not this film version of Ant-Man aligns with the comic book version. Or versions, I suppose, since this film features both Scott Lang and the original man behind the antennae, Hank Pym. But I can say that as somebody watching this film with no other background for the character, Rudd feels like a perfect fit. He's believable as a thief who can think on his feet, believable as a pretty average guy suddenly thrust into a superhero role, and most importantly, believable as a loving father who's just doing anything he can to be a part of his daughter's life. The humor and delivery and facial reactions are what immediately come to mind, but the heart is what helps to keep him more than just a one-liner slinging jokester in a retro motorcycle suit. For all the humor that's present in this film, Ant-Man isn't without its jokes that miss, and isn't without a few gags that wear a bit thin after a while. It also suffers from the widespread MCU underwhelming villain curse, and has some pacing issues, especially given the fact that it has to introduce and set up not one, but two Ant-Man character backgrounds. But this film really excels when it's able to delve into the size-altering shenanigans. We're dealing with a superhero who can shrink down smaller than an ant, so if the film couldn't capitalize on the silliness and fun of that power, then there'd be a problem. Luckily, we get plenty of ant-sized antics to keep things more than entertaining. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is how fun this movie is. Now, admittedly, most MCU films are pretty fun and entertaining, but this is one of only a handful of entries in the franchise that feels like it's going out of its way to be fun. But really, when your main character's power is that he can shrink down and control ants with his thoughts, how can you be too serious? It's an inherently silly concept and an inherently goofy character, so leaning into the comedy and presenting it all in the form of a bouncy heist film was a very fitting idea. Speaking of fitting, the second pro is Paul Rudd as Scott Lang. I mentioned before that as somebody who's never read the comics, I have no idea if Rudd is remotely close to the written version of this character. But for this film, for the comedic approach, for the humorous heist, for the character interactions that come into play, he just works so well. I feel like Paul Rudd's probably not a guy anybody would have pegged to play a superhero, but at this point, I can't imagine anybody else as Scott Lang. On the con side, the biggest issue is the villain. This is certainly not a new issue for the MCU, but it's still disappointing to see yet another underwhelming one-note antagonist. Darren Cross isn't a horrible character or anything, he's just one that we've seen several times before, within the MCU. The CEO with greedy and nefarious plans for his company's tech. I mean, this type of villain is something we've had since the first and second films of the franchise. So, not terrible, but overly familiar. Con number two is the pacing. This is an origin story, and they always require more setup than a sequel does, but the story takes a while to get going. I think this is largely due to the fact that this film tries to set up and give just about equal time to both Scott Lang and Hank Pym's stories. It adds background to the plot, and it also allows us to see the father-daughter parallels between the two characters, but it does slow things down a good deal at the start, and periodically throughout the film. The fun of the shrinking scenes and the energy of the heist elements of the film help to keep things moving once the main story's truly underway, but it's definitely a bit slow going to get there. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Ant-Man or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Ant-Man 3.5 out of 5 paws. Although it falls into some of the same trappings as other Marvel films, with its villain and pacing, Ant-Man is an incredibly fun and breezy entry into the MCU. Like his myrmecological character, Paul Rudd does most of the heavy lifting here, but this film makes good use of its shrinking antics to help keep things entertaining throughout. I would recommend Ant-Man to fans of the MCU's more comedy-heavy films. This one still has some nice heart to it and a corporate conspiracy plotline, but it leans heavily into the humor, feeling like one of the more light-hearted entries in the MCU. Also, if you like movies with characters who change in size, this has a lot of fun scenes featuring size-altering shenanigans that are sure to entertain. If you liked Ant-Man, I would recommend Mrs. Doubtfire. It might seem like an odd suggestion at first, but this is another comedic film in which a father goes to extreme and not particularly legal lengths to be able to spend time with his kids. If you liked the shrinking scenes, you should definitely watch the aptly titled Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. No superheroes here, but there are plenty of giant sets and forced perspective shots. There's even a friendly giant ant with an ant-inspired name. And if you just want some more Ant-Man, you should check out the first sequel, Ant-Man and the Wasp, which expands upon ideas set up in this first film, like the quantum realm and Hope's involvement in bug-based superheroics. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Ant-Man? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie that features a character who shrinks? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information on this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.